humans, we are animals. We crave the ability to be we. I know it's called me undies. We undies might have sounded differently. Right?
Is it a disco now?
Yeah, it's the after party, so it's now we go with the flash.
My goal in life is to be a laptop sticker.
Me too.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.
It's a great honor, Mr. Jaffe. It's always nice to be with you.
I'm so happy to be with you. I'm honored.
Thanks for doing this, too. It's a real service to the community.
Thank you for doing this, Joseph, for doing Corona TV in general. And it's your gift to the universe, and it's appreciated.
Very human, and I like that.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're insane!
Welcome, everybody. Do not fear the dark web behind me, but we're going to be talking about spy schools and ransomware. It's just an intriguing bunch of topics, and I'm so happy that you are with me today to talk about it. And more importantly, I'm happier that Dan Golden is here because he is the subject matter expert. For those of you that are listening on Clubhouse right now, we are clubcasting, which is my made-up term. And as I've said to people, I will sue the pants off anyone that tries to take credit for it if and when it sticks. And today, the after show will be held on Zoom as always. And so you can actually participate. You know, a listener, a passive listener, a viewer can actually become part of the show, which is the same thing with Clubhouse too, but you'll be able to listen live on Clubhouse. So just trying to mix it up a little bit, kind of exciting to be able to see the world as it is changing. Tom Morris is here. He's saying spying on the show today. You are lurking, but you will come out of lurker mode, no doubt, because you will be commenting. And of course, you know, it wouldn't be the same without my mom all the way in South Africa. So hello to you. Well, today, quite appropriately so, I should add, is Data Privacy Day. You know, one thing is for sure, your data is not private. It just isn't. You know, if your password is password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, fear not, because A, you're probably like about 60% of the world. But on the other end, most likely right now, your password is being traded on the dark web, and maybe even being used to buy some GameStop stock at the moment, which seems to be all the rage. Alan Braithwaite is here. He's a first-time watcher. Fantastic. Forget about first-time listeners. You're a first-time watcher. Well, welcome to the show. And I will warn you that the show is addictive, so just be careful. Stephen Rubin is here, and Tom adds, if you want to see the rest of the show, it will cost you only $200 in Bitcoin. David Libby adds, my password is CoronaTV! 123. Seriously, dude, why did you share my password? That's not nice. That's really not okay. How did you get my password? That's really awful. Just kidding. Well, let's get on with the show. As I said today, Daniel Golden, he's the senior editor at ProPublica. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. You're going to find out about what he is interested in and working on right now, but also we're going to talk about two of his just incredible books. And also we're going to learn what a muckraker or muckracking is, or gadflies. There's going to be we're going to learn a lot. This is going to be educational and inspirational. Just to give you a sense of a few other things, and then we'll get into our soliloquy. Tomorrow is another community edition for those of you that are new to the show. I have over 200 guests, or almost 200 guests. And so every Friday, I invite 5 back, anyone that wants to come back, quite frankly. It's not elitist at all, but we've got Peter Shankman, Jason Borowitz, Judy Glover, Chad Dick, and David Berkowitz on Friday. And then next week, just to give you a little sneak preview, Robin Caller, John Jantz, Justin Levy, Tracy Lovett, and then a community show with Jeff Gotthelf, Tom Morris, who's actually watching right now, Lisa Cohn, Bob Heyman, and the wonderful Faith James. So that gives you a sense of what to look forward to next week. Birthdays, as always, Andrew Findlater, David Jones, Aidan Agras, who is 50 years old today, living in London, and then a whole bunch of people on LinkedIn, Martin Vass, Christian Chapman, Umesh Belimuthan, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Have a great day. I love this one. Heike Lieb Wilson, Mrs. Brightly. Well, you know, when your name is Mrs. Brightly on LinkedIn, clearly you are only sharing hope, positivity, and optimism. Well, as you know, Dan Golden wrote a book called The Price of Admission. And so I decided to tweak that a little bit. And my soliloquy is called The Value of Admission. Do we need colleges? I'm asking the question. Why can't I? I'm not trying to be controversial, but part of my heresy philosophy, coupled with some of the lessons I've learned from previous guests on the show, is to embrace the question without necessarily concerning myself with the answer. In fact, the goal, besides the ensuing discussion, is to produce more questions. And in doing so, keep the conversation going and growing. Off the bat, let me level set. I strongly believe in the power of education. I'm an academic at heart. Book smarts versus street smarts has always been my internal struggle and personal journey. Also, I teach at West Virginia University, and I'm hoping to find an adjunct role in 21 or 2022, and who knows, perhaps become a full-time professor. That said, my guest today, Pulitzer Prize winner Dan Goldman, got me thinking. So let's unpack or deconstruct what I would call the college experience. And in doing so, frame it in terms of value. For the price one pays and the time one invests, and these are not necessarily the same people, is it worth it, the price we pay and the time we spend? The clue in the above statement is the word experience, college experience. And it comes down to journey versus destination, whereas the latter could be classified as getting a job and becoming part of a thriving and productive alumni network. The former includes a whole bunch of softer, but not necessarily of lesser importance, benefits like sports, establishing friendships for life, Greek life, independence, and for sure, a little bit of partying. You'll notice I didn't touch on the functional benefit, that is the actual product being paid for, education. That's kind of a given, isn't it? The output-outcome 1-2 punch is important, whichever way you look at it. And after 4 or even 8 years of undergrad and grad school, is the value commensurate with the investment? Throwing a real spanner in the works, thank you 2020, was the dramatic reduction and even elimination of on and off-campus in-person activities, both academic and social. And social unrest has impacted and in some cases cancelled Greek life altogether on some campuses. Like I said earlier, it's less important to come up with a silver bullet answer, but I do hope that these questions lead to both introspection, innovation, and ultimately reinvention across a variety of tracks, including, but not limited to, the actual price of admission. Something to think about. Of course, I'm only curious what Dan Golden has to say. He might not have anything to say, but we will hear from him soon enough. Let me tell you a little bit about our wonderful guest today. Journalist and author Dan Golden is a Boston-based senior editor at ProPublica. Golden has been instrumental in 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 as an editor and 1 as a reporter, and is best known for his reporting on higher education. He won a Pulitzer for the Wall Street Journal in 2004 for a series of articles on preferences for children and donors in college admissions. He expanded that series into a critically acclaimed 2006 national bestseller, The Price of Admission: How America's Ruling Class Buys Its Way into Elite Colleges and Who Gets Left Outside the Gates. An updated edition with new reporting on the Operation Varsity Blues scandal was published in 2019. We'll definitely talk about that. He's also the author of Spy Schools: How the CIA, FBI, and Foreign Intelligence Secretly Exploit America's Universities. Cannot wait to bring him on. Let's do that. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Joseph. Pleasure to be here.
So Well, I have to ask, any thought? Normally I say, well, you can if you want, but I am curious. Any thoughts on that soliloquy?
Yeah, I did have some thoughts on it. I mean, my book, of course, was about how colleges, in a way, are debasing the value of education, because my view was that elite colleges, that their mission was to find and help the students with the greatest talent and potential, maybe from deprived backgrounds, who then could move up in society through education. And what I found they were doing instead was very wealthy families were donating, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to colleges to get their kids in, and often their kids did not have academic records that would normally get them into the college. So the family was getting a kind of prestige value, but the student wasn't capable of benefiting as much as other applicants who didn't get in, and the college wasn't providing maximum value either. So my title, The Price of Admission, you're right. I mean, it was intimately connected with the value of what college education should be.
Well, we're going to come back to that shortly, but one of the things that I actually do with my guests, and I feel like it's a little off the beaten track, but it's to actually get to know the real people, the people behind the Twitter account and the bios. And so, you are an investigative journalist, so am I. So we send our sleuths into exploring the backgrounds of our guests, and we pull out all these weird and wonderful facts. Don't worry, you might be familiar with the facts, but maybe not the very badly retouched images. But one of the things that our investigators found out about you is that, I love this, you made a New Year's resolution to read The Origin of Species, but you got bored with it and switched to a book about the Marx Brothers. Those are two very different books and subjects, or maybe they aren't.
Well, they are different. And, I love the Marx Brothers ever since I was a kid. And, I was trying to read The Origin of Species because I had a book idea kind of vaguely related to Darwinism. And I got lost in the, first 10 pages of discussion of all kinds of arcane facts about different species. And I saw that Jerry Seinfeld in the Times had recommended this book about the Marx Brothers. So I was reading it. And the photo here is funny because many, many years ago, my wife and I actually went to a party dressed as, I think I was Chico and she was Harpo, if I remember rightly. But the book was called Four of the Three Marx Brothers, I think, something like that. And it was very funny, very interesting. I mean, Darwin was a great man and, one of the most important people in history, but I don't think he was as witty as Groucho Marx based on the first 10 pages of The Origin of Species. And, I needed a few one-liners, so that's where I went.
Well, I think last week was actually one-liner day, so you came in on the wrong day. But I called one of my companies Evolution. The whole Darwin's quote is almost like my North Star. It is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that is the most adaptable to change. That literally, if I was allowed to, based on my religion, I would tattoo that on my body.
I'll go back to the book and keep reading till I get that far.
So maybe it will re-inspire the reading. Well, we found out something else about you, and that was that you've been passing time. I mean, you're a busy guy, so I'm not really sure how much of this trivia stuff that you're doing that you actually find time for, but you were passing the time during the pandemic by watching endless British crime series on BritBox and doing the New York Times crossword spelling bee Sudoku. So here is, did you come across Broadchurch, by the way?
Yeah, I think Broadchurch, Vera, Shakespeare and Hathaway, A Touch of Frost, New Tricks. I mean, we watched an episode of one of these pretty much every evening, and they're all done well. I mean, British TV is pretty high quality, and you sort of start to notice patterns and a certain sameness, and you get pretty good at identifying the murderer after about 3 minutes. But it's fun. It passes the time. I mean, I wouldn't be doing it under normal circumstances probably, but it's the pandemic. It's a safe thing to do.
I am actually watching a French-based series called Lupin at the moment, which has been terrific as well. And the episode I just watched, very much in keeping with the conversation that we'll have soon on ransomware. So that's just a little bit of background that I thought we would just, start with. But let's get into your day job, even though you're you're focusing on a new book right now. ProPublica, I went and looked up the mission statement to expose abuses of power and betrayals of public trust by government, business, and other institutions, using the moral force of investigative journalism to spur reform through sustained spotlight of wrongdoing. This is a higher power. This is the Lord's work. But we're going through I almost looked at ProPublica as the Wikipedia of investigative journalism. But I would love for you to talk about where we are right now in the world, in this country, both in terms of journalism, the state thereof, and as a subset, investigative journalism, and why it's so important for people like you and ProPublica to be, leading the way, if you will.
Sure. I mean, ProPublica is maybe a dozen years old now or something. It's a nonprofit that's grown very quickly, and its mission, as you said, is investigative journalism. And its success says something about the state of journalism today, because essentially what it does is fill gaps that, cutbacks in local newspapers and other media, have had a big impact. So local media can no longer do investigative journalism the way they used to. They can't cover stuff in depth. That's true in some cases of national media too. So ProPublica steps in with a sizable staff of investigative reporters doing national stories, and then we also have something called the Local Reporting Network, where we partner with and fund reporters at local outlets who are doing investigative journalism. And of course, I mean, it's tremendously needed. I mean, I was at ProPublica last year. I was overseeing coverage on voter suppression and voter fraud, trying to sift, fact from delusion. And, obviously the ransomware series. I've edited a lot of health stories, education stories. I mean, we try and take the time to dig deeply, make sure we ferret out the correct facts and kind of serve as an antidote to fake news from whatever source.
One of the biggest challenges has been the concept of being truly objective and independent, and being accused ultimately, whether one person reports in a certain way or another way, of being liberal, conservative, or whatever the case may be. How does one truly subscribe to objectivity and independence, which is really just a synonym for the idea of truth? How do you actually drive that point home when people are going to attempt to debase, devalue, and ultimately push down an opinion because it doesn't share their worldview? Well,
I believe in objectivity and independence of journalism, and those were the values I was raised to as a young reporter. And it can be difficult because you can't. I mean, it's not good to write an objective story that says Trump or whoever said this, but the other side said that, as if they both have an equal claim to the truth, because Trump made things up all the time. But I'm also not in favor of simply saying, Trump or whoever is a liar, you can't believe this. I think what you do is you put the facts in that contradict what the false claim. You show that it's false. So, in a voter fraud story, if Trump claims there's widespread voter fraud, I mean, now they say it's baseless as shorthand. That's fine, but you have to go ahead and say why. 60 courts rejected it. Republican appointed governors and secretaries of states found no evidence of fraud, and so on. So the attorney general appointed by Trump found no fraud. So I mean, you have to use facts to prove your point, and that's objective because those are true. And so I'm not generally in favor of opining, because I think in most cases, if you do your reporting well enough, you can show through the facts that you put together to build your case that what separate truth from falsehood.
Tom says we need a public conversation about objectivity. I had a great Zoom with friend Alan Murray yesterday, editor-in-chief at Fortune, and some deep and important issues came up around this idea. I like that. I like the idea of actually really developing thought and conversation around what is real objectivity. It seems like we talk about independence and objectivity, but have we actually developed almost principles and practices and a philosophy around what is considered to be, true independence? So maybe we'll see more of that, and I'm certainly sure that you're doing that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other point I'd make is that objectivity is not just about the words you choose in the story. It extends to the choice of ideas that you pursue, which should be guided by what's the most interesting story, how solid is the tip that we're getting, how outrageous is the behavior we're being told about, is this material we can reasonably get, and those kind of journalistic considerations rather than political considerations. So, for example, I did a piece early this year as a reporter, co-byline with a couple other people, about Joe Biden's brother, and it was an investigative look at his brother and some of the questionable behavior he's had in the past, and Jimmy Biden. And this was actually left over from a story I'd written 10 years before that had never run because the magazine I wrote it for folded. But we resurrected it when Biden was a candidate, and because it was noteworthy. And any issues on Joe's behavior that would pale to compared to the kind of things that Trump has done. But it's important to look at everybody, and it's important to not let your story choice be guided by a pure political viewpoint. And so as an editor, I try and strive to make sure that we just pick the best ideas that are most worthy of the public's attention and dig into them.
A word that actually came up on a previous episode of the show was this idea of content responsibility, because we talk about content strategy and content design and content marketing, and we ended up going down a really interesting path about content integrity and content responsibility, and I think you certainly alluded to that in your response. Well, I'd love to segue into this tremendous book, The Price of Admission, with a beautiful silver spoon on the cover. But before we do that, on LinkedIn, Ted Wright said, isn't it muckrack versus muckrack? So the question for you is, and I read this in your bio, it said, some annoyed college administrators have called Golden a muckracker or gadfly. Both are labels he wears with pride. Well, that may be so, but now we're going to have to figure out, are you a muckracker, a muckraker, and what the hell does that word mean?
I think it's muckraker. It must have been a typo or something. I don't think there's a C in it. I could be wrong. And I think it means, raking muck, going through dirt to find information. That's what it comes from. It may well date back to the 100 years ago, to the era of the great muckrakers in the Teddy Roosevelt period, the people fighting against monopolies and the Upton Sinclair and all those great investigative reporters of that era.
Well, someone certainly has to be able to go through the mud, especially for a greater cause. As you are talking a little bit about the book, if you could just set up the book briefly, and then we'll obviously talk about the update to the book. I will make sure that I post a link to Amazon in below on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. But tell us a little bit about the book, the central premise, and obviously, in recent times, we'll talk about the scandal that you updated, but Jared Kushner's example that you wrote about.
Yeah, this book originated in reporting for the Wall Street Journal in 2003, when the Supreme Court was considering a affirmative action lawsuit against the University of Michigan. And the lawsuit was by white students alleging that they'd been turned down where minority students with inferior records were getting in. And so this led me to look at the various preferences that were at play in Michigan admissions. And I found that, yeah, there was affirmative action for minority students, but there was also essentially what amounted to affirmative action for white students, rich white students, and that this was prevalent all around the country, and that children of alumni, children of donors, children of celebrities were getting advantages in the admissions process and getting in with relatively low credentials in terms of test scores, class rank, and so on. And that's what the book was about. I came up with a lot of individual examples to prove my point, tracking down donations, talking to the children who'd gotten in, and how they'd gotten in, what they thought about the process, talking to their parents, talking to college counselors who were very frustrated by the big role that money played in admissions. And essentially what I exposed was that the colleges at the time, and still somewhat today, claimed that, for example, legacy preference for alumni children was only a tiebreaker among candidates of equal merit. And I showed no, it was actually worth hundreds of SAT points, which has been borne out by subsequent studies. They claimed there was a firewall between the development or donation office and admissions, but there wasn't. I mean, I came up with lists of candidates that development offices had given to admissions and said, you have to admit these people, and so on. So what I showed was that what's supposed to be a meritocratic process was tainted by the college's greed, and the book attracted a lot of attention. And because Jared Kushner was one of my main examples, it still attracts a lot of attention.
So according to what you reported, and also what is known, Jared Kushner was admitted to Harvard after his father pledged $2.5 million to the university, and you actually wrote a piece on ProPublica called "The Story Behind Jared Kushner's Curious Acceptance into Harvard." I guess it wasn't curious at all. It was quite obvious in the end.
Yeah, he became a kind of a poster child for many people who, of wealth, who from wealthy families who get in the same way. But yeah, I had come across him from my book, and of course, at the time, he wasn't famous. He wasn't yet married to Ivanka Trump. He wasn't, Trump's son-in-law. He wasn't in the government, and so on. But I had decided that I couldn't do this book without give Harvard a pass. Since I had gone to Harvard, and it's the country's, arguably its most famous university, I needed to look at how Harvard did this. And I got hold of a list of about 400 people who were on something called, I think, the Committee for University Resources, something like that, who were essentially its big donors, or people that they thought would be big donors. And I went through them, and I wanted to figure out how many of their children had been accepted to Harvard. I figured if a high percent of their children had been accepted, since Harvard had an overall low acceptance rate, that would show favoritism toward donors. And sure enough, I found that at least half of their children had gone to Harvard. But I also looked at some of the individual names, and the Kushners stood out because Jared's parents were both on the list, which was kind of unusual, and also because they had no affiliation with Harvard. They weren't alumni. Most of the people were. And also, of course, because his father at the time had recently gotten in, criminal trouble over, hiring a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law to get back at his sister. So that's why I looked. He hadn't done particularly well in high school. A lot of people in his high school had been stunned when he got into Harvard. And I found the record of the donation. And so I featured him in the Harvard chapter. And then I watched in wonder as he rose to his, fame in the Trump world.
And I appreciate you, talking, making that distinction. It's an important one, obviously, because, we often talk about causality does not necessarily imply correlation. But what it speaks I think what it speaks to is that there's a game, and you play the game whether you're aware of it or not. As a parent of my daughter is a sophomore right now in college. My son is applying to college, and you almost feel like you're trapped in the game. Like it's one of those Tron-like types of experiences where there's pressure, external pressure, and this is obviously above board, clearly above board. But I'll give you an example of what I mean by the game. So the game is donating, for example, and feeling like but not necessarily recognizing at one point that might be so unfair on so many levels. But I'll just give you a more innocuous example. Going to visit the college. Just going to visit the college. You show up, you go on you listen to the informational tour, you tour the college, but that in a way you've indicated interest in the college. There's nothing wrong with that. And no one quite knows whether, in fact, by showing up and being marked that you actually made the trip to the college, you've elevated your application. But the problem, of course, is how many people cannot afford to be able to travel and visit the colleges and visit on campus. And I think in a way that's part of the game, but on a much smaller level. How do we get beyond that to recognize that, quite frankly, showing up and visiting a college should have no way, shape, or form or influence in terms of whether you get in or not? And maybe it doesn't.
Well, that is a small part of the game, and like you say, one of the more innocuous. I mean, while you're touring the college, as part of a big group or something, there's probably a kid whose parents are, trustees or big donors or important alumni or celebrities who are getting an in-person tour from the dean of admissions. So that there's different levels of it, and I made a bunch of recommendations in my book, virtually none of which have been adopted, but I recommended, for example, a firewall between admissions and true firewall between admissions and development. I recommended that if admissions officers at a college or the dean of admissions, if they knew the family, they should recuse themselves from the decision. A few places do that, but not very many. And also I recommended reducing or eliminating the admissions advantage for certain sports that basically only white upper class families can afford their kids to play. Horseback riding, sailing. Some of the sports that came up most vividly in the scandal a couple of years ago, because inner city kids are probably not going to be at a high school that has a horseback riding team, or a fencing team, or a sailing team. So, there's a certain bias built into the system in a lot of different ways, and I tried to expose that and suggest ways to correct it.
I want to tread very, very carefully down the path of my next question, which is almost playing devil's advocate and arguing, shouldn't you be able to, all things being equal, buy your way into a college by spending $2.5 million of money that potentially could go towards subsidizing kids that couldn't afford college? But I will say one caveat. Clearly, I don't believe this, but I'm just playing this devil's advocate or submitting it to you. But maybe that would come with a little caveat, a little asterisk, that every time that is mentioned on your public record, in your resume, whatever the case may be, there's just a little asterisk that says, by the way, this was, it's like the equivalent in search engine marketing of a paid placement versus organic. I'm just curious as to what you might think, or is it just an absolutely binary, no way, no time, no how?
Yeah, I go with the no way, no time. I don't agree with that argument for a couple reasons. First of all,
and nor do I, by the way.
What?
And nor do I. But
okay, good. I mean, first of all, there are certain colleges that have a distinct and impressive enough mission so that people give to them without regard for getting their kids into college. I mean, my view is if you're a college, like in my book, I wrote about 3 of them. One was Caltech, which of course tremendous science institution, and people give just to be associated with and further the scientific mission. There was a college in Kentucky that really wouldn't admit anybody whose family made more than $50,000 a year because that was their mission. Cooper Union in New York. It was the one in Kentucky was Berea. Cooper Union in New York, admissions was strictly based on ability and promise and art and architecture and things like that. And all these schools raise a lot of money. So my view is one of the problems in America is that so many colleges are basically, you can't tell them apart. They offer the same curriculum. They have the same type of faculty. And so there, maybe the only reason somebody gives to one instead of another is because they want to get their kid in. But it can be done a better way. The other thing I argue is that people say to me, kind of what your question implies, which is, well, these are private institutions. Can't they take the money, do what they want? Well, they're not. They're private nonprofit institutions, which means that they get a tax break in order to serve the public interest.
Yeah.
And, if you get a tax break to serve the public interest, then you should accomplish your mission of admitting, the best candidates and the most deserving candidates of the talent and potential to do the most in our society. That's your obligation. Mm-hmm. So instead, admitting, unqualified children of wealthy people, you shouldn't get your tax break.
And of course, at the end of the day, there is a great equalization that happens when people leave those campuses, look for a job, and there are going to be people that are certainly going to be elevated to the top of the applicant pool based on the college they went to. And so in the absence of any form of disclosure or asterisk or caveat, it's just one of those unacceptable conditions. And that's why you just helped me go through what I learned is called paradoxical thinking, which is when you take something through to however outlandish or extreme it is to its logical conclusion. That logical conclusion is almost always the truth. Now, talk about validation. After all your unbelievable investigative reporting, the scandal breaks, and you had to update the book, and that's why you've been in the news again as well. But this, I think, I think the other point, Dan, is that where there's smoke, there's fire, right? And once you start to erode what are the walls of integrity, you end up with crossing over from the equivalent of tax avoidance to tax evasion. So I would love for you to just give your sense as to what you wrote about in this update based on this just incredible scandal that rocked all colleges, quite frankly, based on Lori Loughlin and Felicia Huffman, amongst others.
Yeah, it was a fascinating scandal. And I mean, my book was about the big donations to colleges. Here, they went a step further and through a kind of independent college counselor, bribed specific athletic coaches. And one of the big things that had changed since my book originally came out, which this scandal reflected, was this huge increase in these independent college counselors who, in the old days, the guidance counselor in the high school handled college admissions, but now, the wealthy go hire their own counselors. And the problem is the high school guidance counselor is, beholden to the school, to their employer, to the whole class. So they have more of an incentive to do what's right and try and peg a student to an appropriate school. Whereas the independent counselor, their only obligation is to the client, the parent. And if the parent wants to, I've got to get my kid into the Ivy League or Stanford or Duke, or be damned, that's a lot of pressure on the counselor. So I looked at this one high school in Southern California, a private high school, and 2 kids on the tennis team. And one was a terrific tennis player, very promising. He wanted to go to a school in California. He got in there. He was a good student too, but he couldn't. They had told him by his senior year in high school he wasn't going to make the tennis team. He was close, but not quite there. It was a top tennis team, and so he wasn't going to college for athletics. So he's sitting in the audience in April of his senior year or the spring of his senior year when the school holds a ceremony to celebrate its athletes who are, going to college on, with to play sports and, the cream of the crop. And to his astonishment, a kid is in the group who is a poor tennis player, barely made the high school tennis team and, played doubles if he did. This kid in the audience could have beaten him easily, at any time. But this kid in the group they announced he was going to Georgetown University to play tennis. And of course, what transpired was his mother, his grandparents were extremely rich. It was the Hot Pockets family. And the mother had ditched kind of a very responsible counselor they'd had and hired Rick Singer, the architect of the scandal. And he had bribed the Georgetown tennis coach. And this kid got into Georgetown. Of course, he never played, one set of tennis for Georgetown, but it was quite a contrast. And the first kid, the terrific player, was, stunned, and kind of his ideas of equity and of what America was about were shattered. So I focused on those two kids and some of the broader meaning of the scandal, and that's what it ended up being quite a long update. I think 15,000 words or so, and that's the version of the book that's now available, in paperback and in stores and Amazon and so on.
So I'm going to ask you one more question about college admissions and the price of admission. By the way, David Libby says, "Isn't life a game?" No pun intended, but I'll tell you what pun is intended is the fact that this family was the Hot Pockets family. They certainly had hot pockets. That's for sure. Dan, where do you see this going now that you've reported on this and written on this? What does the future of college admissions and in general the admissions process look like? Not just in terms of how it works, but who tends to end up at which colleges?
Well, I mean, it's of course, we're in an interesting period with the pandemic where a lot of people are going to college from home, right, on virtually. And so I'm sure that the elite colleges are somewhat worried. Anytime you offer a service that isn't absolutely indispensable and it gets interrupted, you're going to wonder, are people going to come back? It's kind of like after a baseball strike or football strike. It's like, well, will the fans come back in the stands? I'm sure the colleges are wondering, are more people just going to go to college virtually and not go through our admissions process and, come to campus and so on, because maybe they'll like the other way. But assuming that things go back to the way they were before, in that sense, I mean, I find it worrisome because a lot of the, my sense is that a number of places have suspended, test requirements and so on. And, there's no doubt that standardized tests are, they're questionable. They've been often accused of bias and so on. But they're also kind of the only check on just the colleges admitting any rich kid they feel like admitting because they expect a donation. I mean, the tests were sort of established to provide meritocracy. I don't think they do that perfectly, but there has to be some way of containing the abuses that I wrote about. And I'm just not sure how much attention is going to be paid to that going forward.
I actually had an idea as you were talking, which I'll bounce off you, which is it's almost like the concept of a talent. In the old beauty pageants, right? You had the swimsuit competition, then you had the talent competition. I wonder if maybe what we need is a talent competition where people have the ability to at least demonstrate a talent that goes beyond your guidance counselor, your SAT or ACT scores, your GPA, your essays, the ability to say whether it is singing, whether it is content creation, whether it is the fact that you're a TikToker. I mean, I'm speaking kind of superficially, but I think there are people that can demonstrate their diversity in terms of their creativity, their potential contribution to the group of students. And maybe that's one way. It just sparked it sparked based on what you said about, it's the only thing we got. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, in some of the smaller schools will require, say, a portfolio if you're an art student or example music ability. I think that's great. I mean, and the problem is that the bigger schools get so many thousands of applicants that they apparently can't review that kind of material in detail, and that's why they resort to things they can look at quickly, like test scores and class rank and so on. And the other thing, of course, is years ago, decades ago, admissions switched as schools got bigger from the faculty doing it or experts in the field to admissions officers. So at a small school where faculty are involved in admissions, they can look at an art portfolio and have a pretty good idea of, does this kid have real talent as an artist? But, was an admissions officer going to know that? I mean, they need somebody to consult. And there are committees, but, obviously the ideal way is at a small school where faculty are deeply involved in admissions and the kids can provide individualized evidence of talent or ability. And it's just, is that feasible at Ohio State or the University of Michigan or Arizona State or, Berkeley, one of these huge schools?
In interesting times, who knows, maybe through crowd, through the wisdom of crowds or AI, we might find a way. But this has been a fantastic discussion. I want to make sure we have time for this conversation about ransomware. But in the middle of all of this, you wrote a book called Spy Schools. And I would also love for you just to share a little bit about this book, and then we'll spend the rest of our time today talking about your new passion project.
Sure. This is a book about the hidden war, sort of spy war on campus. And the thesis is that there are some foreign students and researchers and so on who come to U.S. colleges and are there to gather information, steal data, and scientific secrets and so on. And that at the same time, the FBI and CIA are on these campuses recruiting foreign students and researchers, and so that they can send them back abroad and spy for us. So it's a kind of spy versus spy going on at college campuses. One of my proudest boasts is that John le Carré loved it, and he blurbed it, which I was very pleased about, because if anybody knew about spying, it was John le Carré, who recently passed away. But it came out of one case I looked at the University of South Florida, where there was a professor, a native of China, who got in trouble there, and the FBI went to him and said, you can go to prison for what you did wrong, or you can keep your professorship and spy on China for us. And I wrote that up as an article when I was working at Bloomberg, and I thought I was done with it. And then I said to somebody knowledgeable about spying, can you believe this? I never heard of anything like this. The guy said, oh, no, this happens all the time. This is what the FBI does. This is going on everywhere. And, at that point, I realized I had a book about it. And I soon realized it was a two-way street. Other countries were using colleges to spy on us, and we were using colleges to spy on other countries. And, it's got an awful lot of, I think, amazing information about cases that had never come to light of spying at colleges, and from both directions.
It's just fascinating. Well, what I do see is the common thread now. So we go from colleges to spying on colleges to spying in general and spyware, and that brings us to ransomware. So now I can at least see the evolution. But this is where you are focused right now, on this subject of ransomware. And the article that I have in front of me was co-authored, or was written by, actually not co-authored, written by Renee Dudley, who is your co-author. Talk a little bit about why ransomware, why this subject right now, based on your own evolution of thought, of your career and of your interest areas.
Well, you're right. It does kind of evolve in terms of my interest areas. And also ProPublica, asked me to be the kind of cyber editor, which I wasn't really particularly knowledgeable in, but it's been fun. And I suggested a series on ransomware. And it's, ransomware is emerging as a much, much bigger threat than it was even a few years ago. As you know, it involves hackers who, freeze people's computer networks or files, and demand money in order to provide the key that will get them going again or recover the data. And even a few years ago, ransomware was mostly attacks on individuals asking for a few $1,000s. Now they're attacking and encrypting data at governments, big corporations, and asking for tens of millions of dollars, often successfully. And they're also increasingly stealing the files before they encrypt them. So even if you've got backups and you can replace your files, you have to pay the ransom to avoid seeing the data put on the web. And there's one connection to my previous work here also, is that a lot of the targets are school districts and universities, particularly in the pandemic. I mean, ransomware has just gone berserk in the pandemic. And because schools and universities are entirely dependent on, virtual education, they're perfect targets for ransomware because they can't afford, if their computers shut down, they can't educate people. So they're easy prey. So it does continue my interest in higher education, but at the same time, it's an interest in ransomware, and it focuses on this fellow in Illinois you mentioned, Michael Gillespie, and a small group of his cohorts who are kind of brilliant misfits. They're in a sort of elite secret society called the Ransomware Hunting Team. During the day, they just have normal jobs in cybersecurity or whatever. But at night, they crack as many of the ransomware codes as they can, provide the keys to victims so they don't have to pay ransom. And they've saved thousands and thousands of victims from paying hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in ransom. So it's the story of the ransomware hunting team and how it emerged and who the people are, and and through that we're telling the broader story of ransomware.
It's a fascinating story because this guy Michael Gillespie is almost penniless at one point because he refuses to take money from people because he believes that he's part of a bigger cause, a greater good. And personally loves this idea, even going back to his life, being kind of ostracized or beaten up, the prototypical bullied as a kid at school. Now he gets to be the superhero and defend the innocent. It's a beautiful story, but it almost seems tragic, but it isn't tragic in terms of maybe the role that you've played to help him out. But it's so insane that this is the guy on the front line that can't even pay his mortgage.
That's absolutely right. I mean, he was working when Renee interviewed him. He was working a not particularly well-paying job at a place called Nerds on Call in central Illinois, and all kinds of financial misfortunes. They lost their car was repossessed. They almost lost their house. He lost credit, had to pay everything in cash, which he didn't have. I mean, he hadn't gone to college because of financial considerations. And yet, putting all this aside, at night, he'd go on the computer, save all these people from having to pay, ransoms, and then refuse any payment himself because he felt that these people were victims and the fee, he wanted to provide a service. And his wife's relatives, some of his in-laws, they couldn't understand why he wasn't, profiting off this. I mean, because they were in dire straits, but he refused to. And later, after the article came out, he got a better job. He's now doing better, still living in Illinois in the same house and so on. But at least he's paying off some of those debts.
It seems to me that where this is going is almost unquestionably the next battlefield. Just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, just when you thought we would see, or we're seeing, hopefully we'll see the back of COVID, there's going to be a next cyber warfare. And it seems that everything from hackers to the dark web to ransomware is going to start to play a significantly more active role in terms of influencing government policy, relations, foreign relations. Is that an exaggeration in terms of creating a melodramatic premonition of what's to come? Or in fact, is it just a premonition of what is to come?
I mean, none of us can be sure what is to come, but certainly the way that ransomware is exploding, it certainly seems destined to be, ever more, in the public eye as a crisis. It's also fascinating, kind of technically, because it's kind of a combination of hacking and cryptography. So, right. It's got that spy element as well as the hacking element, and it's also it's kind of a cyber crime of choice for the criminals, because if you think about it, it's one-stop shopping. So if you just steal data, you have to find somewhere to sell that data. You have to resell it. But if you encrypt somebody's files, the same person and ask a ransom, the same person you're attacking is the one that pays you. So you get your money a lot quicker and a lot less fussily and without involving as many steps. So it's something that cyber criminals are gravitating to. They're wielding it ever more. Law enforcement doesn't seem to have a way to stop it. And, these guys that we're writing about seem to be, maybe the only effective force against ransomware. And over time, they'll get less effective because the ransomware will get more and more sophisticated, as it's already doing. And it's going to be tougher and tougher for them to find vulnerabilities, no matter how brilliant you are. So there's some ransomware that's properly done that you just can't crack. So, they're kind of like romantic, knights of the round table trying to fight against people who are, starting to arm themselves with machine guns. So it's, it's very worrisome. And, they're doing their best and they're on the front lines, but it's a big challenge, and that's why we're writing about it.
The reason why I even alluded to the idea of policy, policy and government, etc., is that it seems, whether it's someone's emails being held and released. I mean, we know the story of WikiLeaks and Hillary's emails, so to speak, but there are going to be congressmen and members of government who have, whether it's salacious materials or photos, and the ability for that just to become part of the norm in terms of bribery and corruption and blackmail. I don't think it is an exaggeration to realize, just as I was saying, not just an office or a pandemic office or the ability to study infectious diseases. Government and our government are going to need to study infectious ransomware and this world, because, and I think your reporting and your story and your book will certainly open up the eyes of people and realizing that this is just going to get much more pronounced. So that's where I think it's heading.
Yeah, no question. I mean, in a way, ransomware is already the norm. I mean, we only hear about a tiny fraction of the attacks. I mean, so many ransoms get paid that you don't hear about. And like I said, the victims are police departments, city governments. I mean, they'll attack anybody. I mean, and, the city of Baltimore a couple of years ago refused to pay the ransom, and it was attacked. And it ended, the ransom request, it was like $100,000. It ended up spending somewhere north of $10 million to get its systems. Wow. So it's a very expensive proposition not paying the ransom, and it's a difficult choice to make. And it, every company, municipality, police department, they may potentially face it.
And by the way, the article mentions that in 2018, the FBI received only 1,493 reports of ransomware, compared with the 2,000 queries daily to Gillespie's site from about 750 different IP addresses worldwide. So, I mean, that tells you the role that superhero Gillespie is playing versus people maybe a little afraid to bring it to the FBI. So we will be watching the space, and we'll be no doubt watching everything that you're reporting on this. I found a quote. I always have one quote that I try and stump my guest. You don't need to be stumped today because this is unattributed, but this was the quote relating to the story. The weak link in a company's security chain is typically people. So with all the IT and infrastructure and technology, it's generally us human beings that end up being the downfall of our companies. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. It was a real treat to have this conversation. Before you go, I have to ask you the Corona question, and which is, what's the best Super Bowl commercial of all time that you can recall?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a favorite. I don't really remember them because I'm a devoted Patriots fan. Of course, the Patriots are often in the Super Bowl, and this year they're in it again by proxy, because of Tom Brady. So in general, I'm watching the Super Bowl, feeling very tense. And whenever there's a break, everybody else watching the commercial, but I'm getting up to go to the bathroom or get a drink or eat something, because my view is no matter how good a commercial is, it's still a commercial. So I'm concentrating on the football, unlike the other people watching probably.
I think many people feel that way, and interestingly enough, the Super Bowl is sold out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year. We are going to head over to the Zoom after show, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show, if you want to spend some time with Dan and myself and talk about a variety of topics, from college admissions to spy schools to ransomware, whatever is on your mind. And we'll be also tapping into, we'll see what's happening on Clubhouse. But Dan, I just wanted to thank you again for coming in. And we have a custom here on Corona TV, which is if the guest is up to speed and has exceeded expectations, they get the thumbs up or the thumbs down from our warden, which is Chuck Norris. And I have a feeling I know what he's going to say. So let's see what that is.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Yeah, I figured he'd say that. We'll be back tomorrow with community, and we'll see some of you on our Zoom after show. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV after show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at CoronaTV.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.